Hello, good evening and welcome. Tonight on PM Express, we are discussing arguably the world's biggest problem, poverty. This evening, millions of people across the world are going to bed on an empty stomach. That is not all. Many of them go to bed not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. Across the world, these things pervade. There are world leaders, world bodies such as so many world bodies believe that this cannot be allowed to persist. In their view, steps must be taken to change the trend. What can be done? What is being done to reverse this trend and ensure that at least all human beings afford at minimum 3 square meals a day? This is PM Express. My name is Malik Abbas Dabu. Stay tuned. Welcome. As I said in my introduction, today we are discussing this very big problem that has bedeviled the world for such a long time. Of course, giant strides have been made, but there's still a lot more to do. With me to discuss this topic today is somebody who has worked in this area for a very long time, and he works with Sen Ghana. Mr. Osei-Bimpeh joins me to discuss this topic. Mr. Bimpeh, good evening and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
When we say poverty, what do we mean?
Well, in simple terms, poverty can be just described as lack of access to basic necessities of life. How do I mean? You can look at income poverty. That is when you say that certain number of people are below certain poverty line. If you are not able to use, say, $1.50 a day, you are classified as extremely poor.
In our own terms,
yeah.
150 means what?
$1.50. I think you are talking about roughly 6 cedis or so a day. So if you don't spend 6 cedis or 7 cedis a day, you are classified as extremely poor. Of course, it can go beyond that because this is the income measurement of poverty, which has been a lot of challenges are found with it. If you do not have access to basic social services, i.e., shelter, water, basic sanitation, hygiene, if infant mortality in your country is very high, or if you experience that kind of trauma, you are classified as poor. So if you look at that, is when you are looking at poverty in its multidimensional form, and that is the most comprehensive way of determining who is poor and who is not poor. Income measurement is not enough. You may be consuming, say, 10 cedis or even 20 cedis. But if you, if you are a pregnant woman and you do not, you have to die, or you do not have access to basic health services, or if your child doesn't live up to 5 years, if you do not have access to potable water, if you do not have access to toilet, all those are indications that you are poor.
Going by your definition, one would say then in Ghana we have a very precarious situation then.
Yes, we do. If you use the income measurement, you can't talk about the fact that we have succeeded in reducing poverty since 1990 to at least the latest figure that we have. 1990 we were talking about 52.6. Now we are talking about 21.4. If you look at the income measurement, then we have succeeded in reducing poverty. But if you look at the multidimensional aspect of poverty, you are then looking at a little over 40% of Ghanaians who can be classified as poor. So yes, we do have problem because even here in Accra, for example, we have problem with inequality. So for example, you can look at inequality in 2 terms: inter-regional inequality and intra-regional inequality. So let's take, for example, in Accra. Here in Accra, you see people living in complete opulence, very rich, living in big places like Trasacco, the East Cantonment, East Airport and all those places. Here again, within Accra, you have people who live in certain places I wouldn't want to mention because it is not just politically correct to say that they are poor. But we know that such places lack access to basic necessities of life. Toilet is a problem. People have to go on the free range thing. I mean, it's probably dinner time, so I wouldn't want to talk about some of these things. But if you also look at the regional one, you see that, for example, between Accra or between Kumasi and, say, Tamale, Boga, Bota region, Central region, the differences
there are
is
disparities.
Yes, there are spatial disparities and inequalities, has assumed, what do you call it, an upward dimension. And increasingly, we seem to be challenged with ideas as to how we can address growing inequalities.
Figures available to the World Bank suggest that extreme poverty rate in Ghana declined more quickly from 37.6% in 1991 to 9.6% in 2013. In reality, are these figures reliable? Given the situations you just painted, scenarios you just painted about persons even in the capital having to rely on free range, basic things such as toilet facilities, they do not have access to.
No, the figures are reliable to the extent of the measure. I mean, the methodology that was used. Like I said, if you are using consumption, methodologies, certainly that is correct because we have seen that so many people have moved out of that bracket in terms of how much money they spend per day. But like I said, if you want to look at it in the multidimensional form, that is where we have a challenge. So probably the question should rather be, which of these methodologies should we use in terms of classifying the population into poor and the rich, a haves and the have, middle income and that kind of stuff. And so per the World Bank calculation, yes. But one thing that we should also be thinking about is that oftentimes when you are using national average, it always hides the reality. And that is probably something that we should be interrogating. Why would what should we be thinking about? Talking about 2 million Ghanaians who are classified as extremely poor, and 7 million probably poor. And so that alone, the fact that we have people who are not probably going to eat tonight, or who have not eaten 3 times or 4 times as probably the two of us have tried. This is the kind of population that we are talking about. People who, because it has rained, would have to stand somewhere and wait for some magic to happen before they can go to bed. These are the people we are talking about. They may have spent even 10 cedis the whole day, but yet they do not have a dignified means of life. And that is probably, for me, a major issue that we need to be addressing.
Is it possible that these figures, whilst they appear very pretty, may be masking the real problems confronting the people in terms of poverty levels?
Yes, and I think that is the point I made earlier, that if you look at the figures, we will say, and of course, let me make this point, that we don't need to flog ourselves because we still have these situations. The fact that we have been even succeeded in using a single measure to lift 50% of the extreme poor or the poor out of that category, that alone is good. However, the question is, could we have done better in terms of probably putting them on a different pedestal so that it is not just about looking at one single measure, but if you look, then we will be able to look at poverty in its multidimensional form. So then, if we say that poverty has reduced, it is about the totality of all the factors that we need to take into account, but not a single one. And that is problematic because, like you are saying, it certainly hides the reality. And in as much as we should be commending ourselves, we should also be saying that then going forward, what do we need to do to address poverty in its all forms? People shouldn't have difficulty in accessing education. People shouldn't have difficulty in accessing healthcare. People shouldn't have difficulty in accessing potable water. People shouldn't have difficulty in accessing good, dignified shelter. These are the bread and butter issues that we should be considering in as much as we talk about some of the achievements.
In many parts of the country, we do know that there's been a certain steady growth in our economy from the 80s. There's been a certain steady growth, especially from the 2000s. Our growth has been steady to the extent that by 2008, we were averaging around 8%. That went up to 14% in 2011. Of course, in the last 2-3 years, growth has slowed down. But there's been a certain steady growth. Has this growth reflected on the individuals, families?
Yes and no. Yes, to the extent that we have had a shift of source of growth from agriculture to services. That alone means that people who have the opportunity to access higher education have means of sustainable livelihood. And certainly, if you look at the details of some of these analyses, you realize that people who have migrated from certain communities into the urban areas to take up opportunity of growth in the service sector have actually gained. So you can talk about the so-called growth in the lower middle income group. However, the growth in the economy that we talk about has not been equitable, to the extent that it hasn't benefited, equitable especially, and equitable intra-regionally, because it hasn't benefited all the sections of the economy. I mean, in the last 20 or 10 years or so, Accra and Kumasi alone have attracted about 2.4 million each. Why is it that we, Tamale, Boga, on the other hand, are losing people?
Is that 2.4 million? Is that investments or population or money in terms of what?
Well, and the people are migrating to these centers because there are opportunities there. And there are opportunities for them to live themselves out of poverty.
And we're talking about education and the growth of the services sector. We do know that a larger majority of the people who migrate from rural areas, underdeveloped areas to the city centers are not educated people. A larger majority of them are involved in menial jobs like head porting, kaya, and all of that. So the growth in the services sector may, in fact, not affect a larger majority of the people.
Yes, that is correct.
Because we haven't invested in them.
Yeah, that is correct. That is what I said, that the benefits have gone to quite a few number of people. And you are right, because many of these people eke out a living, on the fringes of these benefits. And whenever there are shocks, just like we are experiencing, or we've been experiencing in the last few years, all these people are affected. So the growth in itself has not been equitable. And equitable in the sense that only few people are benefiting. But in accounting for that, it also tells us that if we could provide education opportunities, develop the youth, provide employment opportunities, and develop sustainable employment opportunities, probably I should repeat myself there, to say that when we are able to do that, then that is where we will be ensuring that those people who also migrate alongside the potential middle income group guys are also benefiting the way that those who have education, skills, and so on and so forth benefit. But as it were now, we have key challenges with vocational and technical education in this country. And so even some people who have come out of the university system do not have employable skills. And so they are not different from those who have not even been to school, because I know some people who have been out of school for 10 years, 7 years, 5 years, they're basically doing nothing. And so in terms of them taking advantage of growth in the service sector, because the service sector is not so expansive to absorb, it's not growing at the rate in which it has to grow, to absorb all these people, but it has a lot of potential. And if you look at development trajectory of all countries that are now called advanced, we made progress from agriculture to industry to services. But it seems that our jump is a different thing, because the missing link in terms of developing the industries and the services itself, there are also challenges, because macroeconomic instability, affect the service sector, and so the absorptive capacity of all these sectors to make sure that people are provided with sustainable livelihoods are in themselves not there, and so it is not surprising that agriculture is no longer attractive to the youth.
We will talk about agric and how it has been managed, and whether it has been managed sustainably. But you talked about a number of people that have been lifted out of poverty. Is there any real risk that these people can fall back into extreme poverty? Because, as you pointed out in your last submission, there's no sustainability.
Yes, the risk is there so long as we have structural imbalances in the economy. I mean, we have structural difficulties. Today, this business is doing well. The next day, that business is not doing well. And so you see that people have had to lay off some people. And at least if you take the recent energy crisis, for example, into account, we know that some people have laid off some people, their employees. Whether you may say that this is temporary, but do you want to subject somebody to a temporary situation of poverty? That in itself is problematic. The other issue is that if we are not able to develop the economic potentials of all regions and all sectors of this country, to what extent can we, stay and watch Accra to be the only focal point of attracting people from outside the region? It cannot sustain it. And so, for example, urbanization is becoming a major challenge. And challenges of urbanization itself is also a symptom of a poor society, because when you are attracting all these people and you do not have the social sector in terms of shelter and all those things.
There's no support system.
Yeah, that in itself is it's not sustainable.
And as we saw what happened in Old Fadama, the people come to Accra, they don't have anywhere to go and live. They must find a place to live, and they must do business. Yeah. So they find a place, some disused land. They go and settle there, and then they become a nuisance. They are alleged to have caused flooding, and then one morning we had to go and bulldoze through their ramshackle buildings and then move them out.
I think that we should probably go back to the root cause. If we fail to provide sustainable livelihood opportunities, that is what happens. Because much as some people are migrating to Accra, Kumasi, Takoradi to find opportunities, others will migrate, and actually majority will migrate there, that those opportunities will not be there. But then why do they do so? Nobody would want to leave his or her comfort zone if opportunities were, opportunities abound in where they were living. People migrated to Accra because agriculture was no longer sustainable, or is no longer sustainable to them. There is no way out. So certainly some people will have to find their way out. So in addressing poverty, just like I said, a multidimensional approach is what is required. And that multidimensional approach requires even creating an enabling environment for private sector to thrive, because increasingly what is becoming clear is that government cannot, employment in the public sector cannot be sustained. And as we all know, in recent times, the private sector has not been absorbing as much as it should be. So the best
because there are moratoriums on public sector
yes, and so that's the point. So how if you do not create an environment for the private sector to thrive, certainly these are some of the challenges that you have. And provisioning of the other amenities, I mean hospital, making sure that the health system works, so that somebody doesn't have to come to Accra because because he or she wants to seek health care. Making sure that infrastructure is, there's massive investment in infrastructure, so that people do not have to come to Accra because Accra is well endowed in terms of infrastructure provision. And those are the conditions that we need in this country for private sector to thrive. Because if in my village, for example, somebody can have access to electricity, the roads are good, agriculture is closely linked to industry. Why would that person come to, and the support system and mechanisms are there? As we speak, for example, agriculture is suffering de-investment. If you look at agriculture investment, for example, almost about 70% of it is going into salary, payment of salaries, personnel, emolument, and so on and so forth. So the actual quantum of investment in the sector that is supposed to go to, to investment to provide a kind of support system and enabling environment for the industries to strive is not there. So certainly people who want to go, I mean, they will have to compete with other business interests for loans. And you know that loans in this country are, the best thing to say is that you don't even try it, because farmers...
There are killer interest rates.
Exactly. Farmers simply are not, or agriculture is not attractive. Very few of the commercial banks are attracted to that. And those that are attracted to it, are only giving it to commercial farmers. But if you do not invest in, what do you call it, subsistence farming, how do we graduate them into taking agriculture as a business, a job, a business thing to do? And if we do not work on that and make sure that investment actually translates into positive and sustainable outcomes, we will have a problem. And for a country like Ghana, we have no justification to say that agriculture is not the model of taking people out of poverty. For us, agriculture is the first thing that we need to concentrate on, because take it or leave it, majority of us haven't had the skills. Training them and building their capacity will require a lot of resources, but it will be easier for them to be engaged in agriculture, especially where we have addressed all the structural challenges in the sector, to make sure that when you do it as a business, but not as a means of surviving.
This week, the president of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, is going to be in Ghana. And there's going to be a launch at Jamestown of a campaign, the Africa Report on Eradication of Poverty. Is it your view that international organizations such as the World Bank have done enough to deal with poverty in Africa, for example?
Well, the World Bank may have their own challenges, and a lot of academics and practitioners have criticized them over the years. If you look at programs like Structural Adjustment Program, they all created a generation of poor. But over the years, the World Bank have also they've learned their lessons. And it is not surprising that the World Bank is now supporting social protection interventions, even subsidy payment and so on and so forth. And in the context of how they have evolved from their old ways of doing things and looking at the new ways of supporting social protection programs and making sure that citizens have voice to demand accountability and so on and so forth, which all translate into positive outcomes in terms of poverty reduction or eradication. Yes, the World Bank has done well, has done something, but it shouldn't be the World Bank. It shouldn't be the work of the World Bank for Ghana to reduce poverty. It should be, because the World Bank can only work in certain aspects and provide certain capacity needs. But at the end of the day, the onus rests on us. How do we develop our own programs, build a resilient economy, a sustainable, and ensure that we put economy on a trajectory of sustainable growth? Because if growth is not sustainable, this is the kind of problem you have where inequality becomes, increasing inequality becomes the order of the day. So they have a limitation in terms of how far they can go. For me, the responsibility is on Ghanaians and on government of Ghana to make sure that every citizen of this country, is provided with a dignified means of livelihood. Inequality,
you mentioned inequality there. It's one of the serious problems that the World Bank president wants to deal with. But before we discuss that, let's go for a break. When we come back, we will talk about inequality and the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. Hello, welcome back. You can join this discussion via Facebook, facebook.com/Joy News on TV, or you can follow us on Twitter at our handle @Joy News on TV, or send us a message on our short code 1760, or you can send us a WhatsApp message via 0544 334722. Multi-TV is organizing a multi-TV mobile clinic. The clinic is designed for customers with faulty boxes or having signal problems to get them resolved. From 17th to 23rd October, the train will be in Dansoman Roundabout, opposite the Shell Filling Station, Abeka Market, Tema Community 2, in front of the old Adom FM building, Teshin Agblaza, Ebenezer Junction. All viewers living in these areas are encouraged to meet us at the above locations from 7 to 5 p.m. each day. For further details and prompt responses, viewers challenges, please contact us on 0244 340 415 or 0244 340 424 or 0302 211 680. Multi-TV and HFC Bank, in partnership with Sethi Reality, present an exhibition fair in the housing industry at Golden Tulip, Kumasi, on the 27th to 29th of November 2015. Visit the Multi-TV HFC Habitat Fair to acquire a property and obtain free directives on 1. Acquiring your dream property, mortgaging, decorations, maintenance, and home security. Meet industry leaders during the fair who will discuss all relating to acquiring your affordable home and renewable energy. To exhibit your housing products and services, please contact Multi-TV on 0540 106344 or 0540 1111945 or 0242 737631. HFC Bank, possible together. Sethi Reality, fair and affordable housing is the basic right for all. Noble Reality, own a noble property today. Multi-TV, just thrills. We're still discussing poverty, and with me is Mr. Osei-Bimpeh. He is a country director for SEN Ghana. And before we went on the break, we were talking about the widening gap between those who have and those who do not have. Since the current president of the World Bank Group came into office, he's credited with sharpening the twin goals of ending poverty and boosting shared prosperity across the globe. And this is targeted to happen at 2030. Is this a realistic target that by 2030 we would have minimized poverty to zero and we would have closed the gap between those who have and those who do not have?
I have an optimistic spirit, and I mean but
like, your optimism must be grounded.
Yeah, it must be grounded, and
given
and
what you know,
yeah.
Is this optimism grounded?
Yeah, yes, and I will also give a certain conditions. I think that if you look at the last 15 years and how we didn't approach the implementation of the MDGs the way it ought to have been implemented. And even in the face of the challenges, we were able to make some progress, at least in four out of the 8 areas or goals. And given that this time around, the approach has been different, and that we seem to be embracing the idea of making sure that we start the implementation on time and we integrate the SDGs into our national development framework. That wish or that ambition is achievable. But then the question is, to what extent can this be achievable? We need to look at certain behavioral or certain management traits that we have in this country. How do we use public resources, for example? Do we use public resources in a way that translate into meaningful,
tangible
benefit to the citizens? This is something we need to address. Or do we, if we do, could we have done better with those resources? I have a big challenge in terms of how we even account for the use of public resources. how increasingly, for example, we have district assemblies which are indicted by audit reports. And so for me, we need to look at how we address systemic challenges in the economy, in the body politic of Ghana, so that when we say that we want to eradicate, this time around we are not going to have. We are saying that we are eradicating.
But you are a civil society organization. Are the civil society organizations doing enough? Because if you complain about accountability, are you doing enough holding government accountable? Are the civil society organizations themselves not tainted by politics? Or are their activities not actuated by malice?
Yes, I will not downplay the fact that we have political NGOs. I'm very happy to say that St. Ghana is not one of them. And luckily, luckily for us, they are quite in the minority, and they fade as when they have to go. So for me, those are not really important. But you see, holding institutions and then government or duty bearers accountable is a collective responsibility of all of us. What civil society organizations are doing is only to mobilize and to let people know that we stand to benefit in terms of holding our duty bearers accountable.
Do we have a dormant citizenry? We
do, and largely because there is so much polarization in this country. There is so much, there is a huge gap in terms of how people are supposed to be involved in the development process. So, for example, going forward, how do we make sure that citizens' ownership of the development agenda is increased, so that when we say that we want to reduce poverty, we do it in such a way that within the micro environment, like at the district level, we have a system of providing information to citizens to know that in this district we are doing well. Because oftentimes when you rely on national averages, that is where the problem is, because national average can tell you that we have half poverty. But if you go to a particular district, you realize that resources that were supposed to be expended for the purposes of reducing poverty have been expended in a way that didn't bring any tangible outcomes. To what extent were the citizens involved in the management of those resources? This is what civil society can do in terms of mobilizing them, letting them know that they have the responsibility and the right to participate in the development process. And in doing that, we also have to make sure that those who are managing public resources have the responsibility of changing their attitude towards how they render accountability. You know, hitherto, accountability has been supply-driven. People should begin to look at accountability at the two sides. How do you account to the supply side, and how do you account to the citizens, especially if they are the end beneficiaries of the interventions? And I think that in answering your question, my optimism is based on the fact that we will need a critical mass of Ghanaians who will begin to hold government at all levels accountable for the use of public resources.
Are you seeing signs that this can happen?
Yes, here again I am optimistic, because I think that at least those of us in civil society, no matter how less our reach is, we'll be taking it upon ourselves going forward to engage communities for them to understand what all this is about in their role and how they can influence this. And I also see a change over the years. In the last 20 years, civil society was not as strong as it is today. We have made some progress. Attitude of duty bearers has also changed in terms of how we engage in a positive, deliberative dialogue, manner, so that we all discuss issues rather than to assume, as it were, antagonistic position when it comes to some of these issues. So there is a change, but probably we need to move faster, because the progress we have made in terms of how public officials open themselves up to even criticism, open themselves up to engaging citizens and communities to make sure that citizens' inspirations and needs are those driving factors of our development agenda. This is what we should be emphasizing on. And if you look at how the little progress that we have made, And if we make that resolve that we are going to entrench transparent and accountable governance in going forward, then we can be assured of attaining those goals. But if we do not address some of these things, then it will be the same business, because people will be engaged, duty bearers will be engaging in profligate expenditure, will be engaging in all corrupt practices.
And widening the gap.
Exactly. And in doing so, in widening the gap, because when you do that, when they continue to do that, they deprive citizens of the access to basic social services that can provide opportunities to take themselves out of poverty. And so it requires a lot of factors to be at play before we can achieve that. But I am optimistic that we can work hand in hand with government if government opens up for us to work together to make sure that we work in the interest of Mother Ghana.
Oxfam pointed out quite recently that the wealth controlled by 85% of the world's richest people, just 85 of the world's richest people, is more than that owned by 50% of the lower bottom of the world's population. And this 50% is 3.5 billion. That the wealth that is controlled by 85 people is more than wealth controlled by 3.5 billion of the world's population. This is an unimaginable gap between the poor and the rich. How much is that a problem in Ghana?
Well, it is a problem to the extent that we continue to see, if we continue to see an upward trend in terms of the house getting more. For me, if the house will get more, and we will still make sure that the house not get the basic things that they need in life, i.e. the very things that I talked about, they have unfettered access to education, quality healthcare, nutrition, shelter. If we can provide all of these basic amenities for everybody, then we set them on a pedestal to even chasing those people who have to take their share. If that is, if I can put it lightly like that. But then, if we will not put in place all these safety nets to make sure that the core poor are taken care of, then it becomes a problem. So, if the poor, if the house will continue to have and will not leave the house not in the kind of condition that they find themselves, then that is a problem.
It is mundane to say that education provides that key for people to move out of that poverty zone to a place where they can have a decent life. Are we providing sufficient access to education, and not just education that empowers people so that when they leave school, they can live a better life?
I'm afraid to say that we put emphasis on access, and access at basic level, to the neglect of education at the secondary and then tertiary level. Why am I saying, and let me clear it before somebody gets me wrong. It is important that we make it compulsory for every child of this country to go to school, but that is not enough. That is not enough to the extent that if our education system is not developing skills, then of what use is the education?
You say if.
I'm afraid it is not.
Why? Why not?
Because the orientation of the education system in itself is a challenge.
We have said this time and again. Why don't we change it?
The kind of product that we are having, their cognitive capacity to even be able to diagnose problems and provide solution in itself is problem. In the university, this day, in the university, you get lecturers who are insisting that people must cram things in their head and produce the same thing. To what extent are they, training people to think? Because if you can be trained to think, that is where you become creative and innovative. Unfortunately, our education system is not doing that. The other side is, to what extent are we putting emphasis on science and vocational education? For me, I'll even come to vocational education. Because we have so many things in this country that vocational education, so many problems that the vocational education can solve. But we seem not to be putting emphasis on vocational education If you go to many vocational education, basic equipment that they have to work with are not easily there. Even teachers to train them with the requisite skills. I mean, they can't, having the exposure to be able to, train people to be creative, and innovative, and those things are not happening. So, emphasis on liberal art, and one trajectory that is happening, almost all the universities are adding a form of liberal art. Everybody wants to train lawyers. Instead of, identifying the needs of this country, which is largely science-based education. And so, if it is just about putting everybody through school, then we are not going to get anything out of it. In other words, qualitative, problem-oriented kind of education, solving-oriented education is what we need.
I always cite this example. When I was in secondary school, I went to Sandima Secondary in the Upper East region. A part of the school was carved out and established as a youth leadership training institute, which was primarily to do with building and construction, carpentry, and all of those things. 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the school is virtually at its knees. Why are we not resourcing these technical vocational institutions to deliver the services that they ought to, i.e. train people to be able to use their hands and earn a living? Why aren't we doing that?
I mean, I wish I could provide the answers, but if you look at the budget, trends in the education sector, you realize that what government of Ghana provides essentially goes into payment of salaries. So we are left very little to invest. And so the segment that you are talking about has suffered years of de-investment and neglect. And we seem not to get it right because we don't see the reason why we should put emphasis on technical education. Because if we see the reason why we should put emphasis on technical education, for example, I mean, the president is undertaking an initiative to build
200 community-based schools.
Yeah, fantastic, providing opportunities for people. But I would want to see how many of them are technical secondary schools, so that these people will have opportunities to go to the polytechnics. And unfortunately, the polytechnics too are even, I don't know, I'm even not training people to provide technical solutions or science solutions to problems of industry, problems of technology. So there is a disconnect in terms of what we ought to do and what we are doing. And if we do not come back to see and to say that we have to take a bold decision and get people who have the talent, who have the learning abilities to become the best of carpenters. If Parliament has to, for example, import,
go to China,
it is because we have not invested in carpenters who can do better than the Chinese. But how can you invest
when you send the business to somewhere else, sitting elsewhere across the ocean?
That's the point I'm trying to make, that instead of providing a solution to the problem, we seem to be window dressing, to be window dressing. And when you do that, you only compound the problem. So, I mean, developing employable skills, developing the youth is one clear way of taking people out of poverty. But as it is now, we seem not to be serious about it. Emphasis on education should not only be at the basic level, but should be, for me, on science and vocational education. And we should find every means possible to invest in terms of teachers who are not just going to teach people, in terms of what the textbooks say, but teach people with practical skills for them to be able to put whatever they learn in school into practice, so that when we create an enabling environment, these people can be linked to initiatives like LESDEP or YES, or those are laudable initiatives. But when we do not have the skill pool, how do people become entrepreneurs on their own? You don't just get up to become an entrepreneur. You need certain skills to be an entrepreneur. And if we do not have that link, I'm afraid
catch a breath. I want us to take a break. When we come back, we will look at Agric, what the contribution of Agric is to the reduction of poverty and the efforts to give people at least a decent meal a day. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome. We are discussing poverty, and with me is Mr. George Osei-Bimpeh. He's a country director of SEND Ghana. We were talking about how to get out of poverty, and you listed education, and you told us what to do with our education in order that it can live up to its responsibility of lifting a majority of our people out of poverty. One other key area is agric. Would you say, and I have seen you on campaign platforms, campaigning for support to farmers and fisher folk and all of that, would you say we have handled agric very well?
Not very well. Not very well. Maybe well, but not very well. But so, I wouldn't even say well. Let me tell you something. If we said that we wanted to invest at least 10% of national budgetary resources in the agriculture sector, and
that was a Maputo declaration.
Exactly, and per that arrangement or calculation, we were expected to get at least 6% growth in the sector, and we are scoring below that, and sometimes around 4, some of the years 1.2 or 0.8 or whatever. It tells you that we are not getting certain things right. Investment model is wrong. And one key segment of the population that is faced with poverty issue is women. We did a certain calculation to find out the investment framework that we had developed to implement the Maputo Declaration. And we realized that the direct lines that were going to women in agriculture was only 17%. If women are the dominant population in the food crop sector who are producing food for us, and we are not serious about supporting them to graduate them into working on medium scale farms.
And by dominant population, you mean at the rural level, the larger majority of the people who work on farms are women.
Food crop are largely women. And I'm saying that our targeting mechanism is leaving the women out. And that is why probably we are not attaining the growth rate that we ought to attain. So that's one thing. We haven't been able to resolve issues around land acquisition in this country. And that is one major issue. So investment, of course, if we succeed in putting so much into agriculture and we are not getting the returns as we ought to, then we have every reason to say that we are probably throwing money down the drain because we are not getting what we are expected to get. Why is it that when we succeed in, say for example, giving 11% of the total revenue into agric, and we don't get the 6% that we expect? If we were able, if the calculation was that, give 10%. So the fact that we have also failed to develop a robust agro industry, to develop the value chain of the various agric products, agric produce that we are working on.
Why is that? Because I have spoken to you, some of your colleagues at SEND Ghana, I've spoken to people at Star Ghana, Mr. Ibrahim Tanko, I've spoken to people at Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana, Madam Adongo, and all of these people. And they point out that just across our borders, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, all of these countries are doing extremely well, extremely better than us in agriculture. And if you look at the land system, it's virtually the same. The texture of the land, the quality of the land is virtually the same.
Sometimes ours is better.
So why are they doing better than us? Ivory Coast is doing better than us in cocoa production. Our cocoa production is falling. Why is that the case?
The climate for uptake of improved agronomic practices are far, far better in those countries than in our case, because investment has gone into it. It is about investment and investment and investment. An investment in a way of making sure that the investment actually goes to the land. It doesn't have to be, for example, why do we have to continue to have a situation where farmer extension ratio is still, I mean, if you look at government's figure, it is 1 extension agent to 1,005.
And that's the thing, is there political will? Is there a demonstrable political will to develop the agri sector?
I'm afraid I don't see that.
Because we have stopped the fertilizer subsidy for the past 2 years.
We have been talking about modernization of agriculture since the first PRSP.
The past 2 years, there's no fertilizer subsidy.
2002. Since 2002, and even beyond, I mean before, we have been talking about modernization of agriculture. And you and I know the kind of money that we have pumped into agri modernization. The question is, which segment of agri or which sector of agri have we modernized? And could we have done more in terms of our rate of the speed with which we are modernizing agri? So these are some of the things we need to interrogate. It doesn't have to be business as usual. We need a true agri revolution. A true revolution in terms of making sure that investment actually goes to the ground. It doesn't have to end somewhere where farmers are not benefiting.
Fertilizer subsidy,
yeah,
which is not happening.
Yeah, but even look at the approach to providing fertilizer subsidy. We are struggling with a refuse disposal in this country. How do we link this problem to agri so that it doesn't have to be inorganic fertilizer that is causing problem to the land, but then we support people to use technology to develop and turn all this refuse into manure that we can supply across this country. This is an innovative and a simple thing that we can do. Why are we not investing in that? So
on that note, Mr. George Osei-Bimpeh, we are grateful to have you today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You just heard Mr. George Osei-Bimpeh. He's the country director of SEN Ghana. We're discussing poverty, how to reduce poverty so that people can at least have a decent meal, 3 square meals a day. PM Express, my name is Malik Abbas Dabu. I'm grateful for Mark Bright, my directors, my producer Aisha Ibrahim, who lost. God willing, we will bring you another sizzling discussion on. Good night.